24.
24.
24.
Yeah, more over there.
4 out there, so it's 28.
Put in here.
24 right there.
All right.
The day let's take it. We're going to write something up.
Good morning.
Morning.
Got everybody with us this morning. We're a little bit behind. We had our internet go out again. We got it working. And just good to have those with us here today. Good to have those with us online. We're glad to have everybody. And good morning, Tammy. She just said good morning online. Good to have you with us. This morning we're going to be in Exodus chapter 5. Exodus chapter 5 as we'll jump into our questions before we get there. Exodus 5, of course, is titled, as most people would figure, is Let My People Go. We're going to see where the first exchange between Moses and Pharaoh and this coming there to try to release the children of God, that is all the Israelites. So let's start with the questions. We go to the questions first of all as we look at lesson 29. What was the effect on Jesus' disciples seeing him change the water to wine? What happened to them because of that? They believed. Exactly right. John 2:11. Next one we go to Joseph. And yes or no, did Jacob at his death give each of his sons the same blessing? No, he did not. Next one. What promise of God did Joseph assure his brothers? So it was what he told his brothers after they knew who he was and everything with it. And it was towards the end of his life. What did he assure them of? Anybody remember?
That God wouldn't forget them. They'd take them back to the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Exactly. It's exactly right. And wouldn't forget them at all and bring them out of there. And then, because of that, what was Joseph's request of his brothers when he was near death? Because he knew he wouldn't be alive when they were released. So what did he ask for them to do with what did he ask them to do? Carry his bones back to Canaan. It's exactly right. To his land of where his family was buried. And all his forefathers. So we look here at the next one, Moses. What did baby Moses' mother do with him to keep him from being killed by the Egyptians? Exodus 2, 3, 4. Yeah, put him in a basket, which put him in the river. Remember, the river was for death, is what they were using for at the moment. But actually, God uses water for what? Salvation. And we see how great that is. This brings the next point. After Moses killed the Egyptian, why could Pharaoh not find him? He fled to Midian, exactly to Midian. He fled, he left, and got out of there. Exactly right. Which brings the next question of Moses and the burning bush. Where did God tell Moses the Israelites would worship God when they came out of Egypt? You name both of them, would be great. To name one would be good first. That's a mountain. Mount Sinai. What was the other one? I heard it. Horeb. Mount Horeb, exactly. That's where we see they're the same mountain. What's that? Yeah, they are the exact same mountain. So when the Israelites asked Moses, who sent him, what was his reply to be? Yeah, it was the God of Israel. And he said, you tell them, I am, and understanding that they would realize I am, meaning of that, of course, creator, sustainer, of everything, and that would be God Himself, as they would know in Exodus 3:14, which brings us to the last area questions. As we see Moses, chapter 4, leaves Midian for Egypt. What 3 miraculous signs did God tell Moses he could do if the Israelites did not believe God had appeared to him? Remember, he did them for him. He watched how they were done at first, and Moses being a part of that. And then God said He would use these before the people, not only the Pharaoh, but also who? The elders of the Israelites. That's right, the leaders there we would see. So what did He tell them to do? What were the 3 things? Number 1. Rod and snake. You throw it down, it would rod and turn into a snake. You pick it up by the tail, it would turn back into a rod. Anything else? Put his hand in the bosom and pulled it out. It was pure white. It was leprosy, as we see in the third. Oh, yeah, we put it back in the third. What's the third one?
The water.
He told him he took a jar of water and he poured it on, and said when it hit the ground. So it wasn't when it came out that was really interesting. It was water coming out, but once it hit the ground, it would turn into blood. And so we see that. So those are the 3 things that he would use. Final question. When Moses did not want to lead the children of Israel, what was his excuse? This was the first one. This is one that dealt with you know, basically something to do with the way he talked. What did he say? Yep, he said, I'm not an eloquent speaker, you know, I can't, my mouth doesn't do those kind of things, and I just can't do this. And every excuse he gave, did God have an answer to it?
Yes.
Every single one of them. The main thing, what Moses was saying was, I just don't want to go. You know, that's what it all came down to. I just don't want to be there. But after he went, we see that he did exactly as God said and fulfilled everything that God told him to do. And we see how great that is. So that's exactly right. So now we're going to jump into Moses' life a little more. Exodus 5. He's going to talk here about, of course, let my people go. And we'll begin with 5:1 just a moment before we get there. This chapter, of course, gives the account of, as we said a moment ago, the first episode of Moses and Pharaoh. The confrontation, it's a long confrontation, as we're going to see as this happens, you know, over the demand to let my people go. And the chapter reveals that the Hebrews, even themselves, they were not yet ready for deliverance. Even though they were acting like they were, they actually weren't. But they should suffer some more hardship before their freedom was given to them. We're going to see this with God. The Hebrew slaves must learn that they too must suffer loss, and they will have to pay a price, in fact, for the freedom. And it's, you know, the gift of God, everybody says, oh, God's gift is free. Well, yeah, God gives eternal life, but does he expect us to do something in return to receive it? Without a doubt. Was that ever different in the Bible anywhere? Never was. It was always the same. It was always an action required for that faith and that obedience that came through faith. It's an action faith, as we see. So, the absolute necessity for such suffering, as we see here, derived from the fact that in the general sense, the Hebrew servants in Egypt, as we find them prior to this confrontation, have been relatively comfortable. Relatively comfortable. Notice I said relatively. They've had some, you know, it's been tough with what they've been dealing with, how things are going. And we know that their food may not have been everything they wanted, but they had enough food to be taken care of. And as we see, this was good food. And apparently there have been some leisure times we read about. We saw that allowed them to purpose to the tending of their gardens, the tending of their flocks, and be on their fishing, whatever may become of it. It is also revealed to us in Numbers 11, which we won't go there, but it's farther along, that even after the great wonders, you know, they have been delivered, they kind of grew tired of, what was that stuff, that bread? What was that called? The manna that fell out of the sky. And they wanted to go back to, of course, leeks and garlics. We remember the leeks and garlic, how great it was and everything with it, but it seemed like they forgot everything else they were going through, which was a bad deal to think about it. So the events of this chapter, when it comes out, were designed by the Lord to provide the kind of incentive to not only get Pharaoh to do what he was going to do, even though he wasn't going to do it yet, but it was more to get the Israelites to do what needed to be done. It was to get them to have unity, not only in each other, but also in Moses and Aaron, and realize that Moses and Aaron, they themselves put themselves in a really difficult predicament. I mean, they could be killed any moment. And, you know, they're doing this because they sense what God wants them to do, and it will take them some time, but they'll figure it out, the other Israelites. So, failure to observe really these preliminary moments, everything that's going on here, and the necessary results from what happened has kind of led some to believe that this first confrontation with Pharaoh was a failure between him and Moses. I'm figuring out it wasn't a failure. It was just many changes, stops, you know, along the way to get to where God wanted them to get to. God knew it wasn't going to happen overnight. God knew it wasn't going to be immediate. It was going to take quite a bit. And his main thing was to try to get Israel first where they needed to be. And this would do it. So God's plan was working. It would not cease working until Israel was out of there, crossing the Red Sea, and out of the land of Egypt, moving where they needed to be. So by saying all that, let's go and jump into this. We'll jump into Exodus chapter 5, verse 1. If someone go and read that for us, please.
Afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness.
Thank you. So as we remember in chapter 4 at the end here, we saw that they were there. They got there to Egypt, and now they're actually going before Pharaoh. They requested an audience with him, and they got it. And so now they're talking to him. So this was the start. Let me say this. This was the start of a bad day that will go downhill from right here. I mean, it's going to go downhill. We're going to see this. So verse 2, what they said this. So Pharaoh's going to go ahead and respond. And let's see what his response is. Someone go and read that for us, please.
Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go.
Thank you. So here, Pharaoh's response was completely negative, 100%. Pharaoh's response was characterized by this cynical arrogance, the pride that was in him with what he had here. And it's not that Pharaoh, we need to understand, some say, oh, Pharaoh never heard of God. No, Pharaoh, I guarantee you, knew who God was, had heard of him, what I mean by that, because he's living amongst 2 million people there, Israelites, that they talk about God. They talk about him and everything with him. However, here's the difference. He refused to recognize any authority from this God. He refused to recognize that he was anything that could make him do whatever he needed to do, because Pharaoh considered himself who? A god, and he considered himself the God of all the people. And he also, the pharaohs during that time, remember, didn't just consider themselves gods of the Egyptians. They considered that they had control over everything. So they brought people there from many different nations to, to be slaves and to work for them. And we see this happening, and it's just coming the way it was. So it's, this name, it's not that he recognized it, but it says, I don't see him in the way you think he is. And so the point of Pharaoh, the point with this all is very important words right here. He says, I should obey his ways. Who do you think, who do you think you are to tell me I should obey your God? But he's going to learn that God isn't just the God of the Israelites. God's the God of who? Everyone. Everything was created because of him. And so he understands, that these men were not presenting him with a request, but rather a mandate, rather a law saying this is what you're required to do. And Moses took, of course, Pharaoh's hard remarks, shook off the blow, basically, in a sense, and went out for a little bit and came back with a modified proposal, I guess best way to put it. And that is, let's see what actually God told him to say. Exactly what God told him. This is what you exactly need to say. In chapter 3, verse 18. And Moses is going to change what he said to more to lean in the direction of what God specifically said. So we're going to read this. This is what happened back in 3:18, where God told Moses what he would say before Pharaoh.
Then they will heed your voice, and you shall come, you and the elders of Israel, to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, the Lord God of the Hebrews hath met with us, and now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God.
Thank you. So you notice right here, it's not as, we go back to this verse here, he's not as specific, that we're not going to, because the way it sounds here, let my people go, they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. It doesn't say how many days, it doesn't say for how long. God was very specific because he knew what needed to be heard. So now we get back to Moses again. He goes back in to talk to God, to talk to Pharaoh, and so let's read what he says.
So they said, the God of the Hebrews hath met with us. Please let us go 3 days, journey into the desert, and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword.
Thank you. So notice what's happening here. Moses and Aaron, talking here. Aaron, of course, more likely one speaking, sounds like. It's interesting, his point here, he makes what God said, the 3 days, but he also makes another point. If we don't do this, we can be destroyed ourselves. And to Pharaoh, you would think, here's 2 million people, free labor, he would be like, what? Well, I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen at all, so I'm going to go ahead and let you do what? I'm going to let you go. But that's not what happens because of the pride that is in Pharaoh. Pharaoh believes, no, that can't happen. Nobody can do this to you unless I authorize it. And so that's where we see where, Pharaoh is not who he thinks he is. And he's going to learn that real quick as we see this happening. So let's look at verses 4 and 5, a little more what the Bible says about this event.
Then the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor. And Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor.
So here, all Pharaoh is worried about is not getting the work done. That's all it is, not getting the work done. Really when it comes down to this, Moses is probably going to think like, wait a minute, God told me to do it like this, and it would work, but God didn't say it would work. God made it very clear to Moses. Remember at the beginning, he says, it's not going to work right away. It's going to take some time. In fact, it's going to take time until you tell Pharaoh what, and it happens. His firstborn is going to die. And we see this. So all this coming about, the bad situation was about to get much worse. the same day, Pharaoh communicated to the taskmasters, as we do see them called in the Bible, of the people. And he's, I want to note that, all of these developments, as we look at here, this wasn't over a long period of time. All this is happening in a 24-hour period. So this is happening in one day, this moment right here of what's happening. So as we see this, it's happening very quickly, and we see what they're going through. We may ask some questions, how can this apply to us today? Because we like to take the scriptures and apply it to our lives and see what we can learn from them. And the first point I would say is this, to apply to us, is that obedience does not always lead to immediate success. Very important to get. Obedience to God doesn't always immediately lead to immediate success. Moses and Aaron were faithful. They did what God said. They faced the resistance. They went in there. And likewise, our obedience to God, may be met with opposition from time to time. And we see that will happen. Another thing to think about what's going on here, what works with us today, is that the world does not recognize the authority of God, brethren. We need to think about that. The majority of the world does not recognize the authority of God. Pharaoh did not acknowledge God here, and today's world often disregards the sovereignty that is found in him and his son Jesus. But this should not deter us from proclaiming the word of God, or proclaiming God as God and Jesus as son. We need to continue to do so. And that's what we're going to see Moses and Aaron do in just a moment. And finally, faithfulness requires courage, doesn't it? It really, really does. We see this in Moses and Aaron as they're standing before Pharaoh. Possibly could lose their lives, but they're doing this because they believe God. They know God's going to take care of them, get this through this moment. And as believers today, as Christians, we must be willing to stand firm, in our convictions, despite the opposition. We have to continue to do that. And it's a difficult thing, but that's what we kind of learn from this. We get back now to Exodus. Let's go ahead and look at Exodus 5, 6 through 9. If someone go and read that for us, please.
So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, you shall no longer give the people straw to make brick, or as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And you shall lay on them the quota of bricks which they have made before. You shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words. Thank you.
So basically Pharaoh said, all this talk of sacrifice is just an excuse. It's kind of like when Moses, was doing with God. And this is the way Pharaoh's looking at it. He goes, I'm the only God these people need to deal with. That's what he's saying. And I've got a special word for these people not willing to work, these slackers, being lazy, or what is the kind of way he's looking at it. From now on, there will be no more deliveries of straw. You're going to have to find the straw yourself. And we notice it says that they go out and they can't find the straw. All they can find is what? Stubble. Stubble of what was left over from the straw. That we see this happening. And but at the same time, he says your quota of brick is not going to be what? It's not going to shrink. It's not going to be reduced in any way. You still need to do the same thing. And I think it's real interesting. Look at this. Notice what he says here, the word more. The word more, the Bible has already told us that the Hebrews had already grown tired, groaning, crying out of the cruel labors. But he said the work's even going to become harder now. I always wonder about this moment. This is free of charge, of course. I'll take this part. I always look at this moment and I think of the straw, and I look at the pyramids. And the majority of the pyramids are pretty strong. They're built really well. They're not crumbling. But then you have other things that did crumble some. Like the Sphinx, the face, and other things. And you look at this, and I know it's not a lot of time here during the time of all the plagues and everything that's happening. But at the same time, you have millions of people working here, and they're going to get a lot done real quick. And I wondered if that stubble brick not being as strong is the reason why some items are falling apart over in Egypt and others aren't. I never thought years ago, I went, wow, I wonder if that's really the case. Of course, you can't prove it, can't say that, but it does make a lot of sense when you think about it. So let's jump back into this. Their situation is desperate here. And it could be worse, but it's going to not get great for a little bit. And so let's continue to read what happens here in verses 10 through 14. If someone read that for us, please.
And the taskmasters of the people and their officers went out and spoke to the people, saying, thus says Pharaoh, I will now give you straw. Go get yourself straw, where you can find it, yet none of your work will be reduced. So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmaster forced them to hear it, saying, fulfill your work, your daily quotas when there was straw. Also the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick both yesterday and today as before?
Thank you. So we see clearly they're having a hard time keeping up. Doesn't mean they weren't making any bricks. They're having a hard time keeping up with the quota of what they were supposed to be doing, of the bricks that were being made here. It wasn't that this was much of a difficult task. It was almost in a stance where most people would say, this is impossible. You know, this is impossible to get this done, Pharaoh. How can we do this? So they're really discouraged by what's going on here, and they just couldn't do it. Nobody could do it. As a result, the officers, verse 14, notice these are Israel officers. These aren't Pharaoh officers that were put over the other taskmasters above them, then officers of the Israelites, telling all the Israelites what to do. They were beaten, and they were beaten without mercy. I mean, it was really bad in this moment of what was happening here. So because of this, the Israelite officers went to Pharaoh and tried to do a little labor negotiation, I guess you could say, everything with it. And so once again, take a commercial here, think about some thoughts for ourselves, about ourselves today, how we deal with it. Number one, spiritual breakthroughs often come with greater trials. They really do. You just see that, just when we expect deliverance, we're like, yes, here we go, we're getting out of this. Things may seem to get worse for just a little bit, before that happens. But don't give up on God. That's what we're going to see with these Israelites. We're going to see with Moses and Aaron. Secondly, the enemy seeks to discourage God's people, always. Pharaoh was doing everything he could to discourage them to think about their God. He wanted them to think about just getting the job done that needed to be done. And you and I do the same thing with Satan today. He will do everything in his power to discourage you and I. And then finally, another thought for us today is that God's plan is not always immediately visible. There's a lot of things in our life, I know even in my life, where I've looked at them and go, why is it happening like this? Why are these things taking place? God, I'm going to give you the credit. I'm going to give you the glory. I'm going to put it in your hands. I know you're going to figure it out. But still at the same time, in the back of your brain, you're like, oh, I don't know about this. I don't know why it's happened this way. But just continue to understand that in times of hardship, we must trust in the unseen work of God. And that something will come of this and move in the right direction. Which brings us now back to Exodus 5 and verses 15 through 16. If someone want to read that for us, please.
Then the officers of the children of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, why are you dealing thus with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants, and they say to us, make brick. And indeed, your servants are beaten, but the fault is on your own people.
I like how this is, the Hebrews that come in, they're completely confused. They don't know what's going on. They haven't been told why Pharaoh is doing this, why the change. And they don't understand why they've been deprived of straw. In fact, they make it very clear. They tell Pharaoh, it's not on us, it's on who?
Your people.
It's on your own people, because they're not bringing us the straw. And we see this. So, how do you think the negotiation went? I mean, what do you think Pharaoh was going to say here? Yeah, we're going to get you all the straw you want. Is that it?
Figure it out.
Figure it out on your own. That's exactly right. I mean, you got the land. Walk around land, figure out what you need to do. And look at this. So you guessed it, of course, management didn't care one bit, about the rank and file, what they had to say. Sounds a lot of times like corporate America, sometimes dealing with their own employees. We see this, but we know it's going to happen time to time. But here, these aren't employees. These are people that are in servitude. These are people that are dealing with harsh situations, and they're going through it and trying to get it done. But we're going to find here in verses 17 and 18 that here's what happens. Here's the answer, and we find that the light bulb goes on for the Israelites of what's really happening. If someone go and read that for us, please.
But he said, you are idle. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Therefore go now and work, for no straw shall be given you, yet ye shall deliver the quota of bricks.
Thank you. So now we see in this moment as the light bulb comes on in their minds, They know the word's been getting out around Israel that Aaron and Moses and Aaron are there trying to, get them out of there. That he's got to answer the question. And they realize, what's happening. They're like, wait a minute. Oh, now we see. So Moses and Aaron came to talk to you, and now you're mad at us. You're angry at us because of what's happening. And it's because of what they did with Pharaoh. It's causing to take the punishment of what Moses and Aaron did. But remember, Moses and Aaron are only fulfilling the will of who? God. That's what it all is. They're fulfilling the will of God. So they're doing what they need to be doing. But we're going to see here now. So here's these Israelite, these men that were basically, it's not so much the elders, but the men that were put in charge under the taskmasters that are being beat. They're the ones coming in saying, what's going on here? And as they walk out the door, as they leave, guess who they're going to meet? Anybody got an idea? Moses and Aaron, exactly right. They're going to go face to face with them. Let's see what happens here in 19 through 21. If someone will read that for us, please.
And the officers of the children of Israel saw that they were in trouble after it was said, you shall not reduce any bread from your daily quota. Then as they came out from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. And they said to them, let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us a board in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. So put a sword in his hand to kill us.
So here is the Israelite, these officers, talking, explaining, saying what is going on here. Can you imagine the way those men must have looked at Moses and Aaron when they came out from Pharaoh? I mean, these men they've been beaten, they've been hurt, and they're being asked to do something they don't think is even possible. And, they come out and there's Moses and Aaron, and they're like, you're the culprits. It's you. In fact, they tell Moses and Aaron that they are wrong with who? That they're wrong with God. Look what it says here. And they said to them, let the Lord look on you and judge. So he's like, let him judge you for what you're doing. I can't believe you're doing this. How can these people not think that, God, that they ask God for help? It's like this happens times even in our lives. You ask God for help and he sends it, but we don't think it's the help that we need or expect. It's not the way we want it done. And we look at it and laugh in its face. And this is what's happening here. So they use this extremely strong accusation and questioning Moses, what he'd done. And they called for the Lord to judge Moses and Aaron, and they accused him and Aaron saying, you're the one that's making Pharaoh hate us. You're the one that's going to cause Pharaoh to bring the sword and cut us. It's all you. It's not. And they're going to have to learn it's God. See, this is what I'm saying. These people really aren't ready to be released yet. They're not ready to get out of there. The bad day indeed had gotten worse for everyone, including who? Moses. I mean, look at it. I mean, Moses thinking like this, Moses is probably thinking, this is going to be a lot more difficult than I thought. Or maybe he's thinking back in his mind, I knew it was going to be this hard. Why do you want to do this in the first place, And we see this, but that's not what happens. We're going to see some remarkable faith in Moses in a moment of what we see. Because remember, when things got rough for Moses last time, what did he do? He ran. He got out of there as fast as he could. Didn't even go to God for anything. He just got out of there. So when we look at this here, once again, back to us, what can we learn from this today? Number one, difficult trials can lead to misplaced blame. Very important to understand. Instead of trusting God sometimes, the Israelites, of course, they blamed everything happening on Moses. Likewise, sometimes Christians will blame, will lash out at others as they're facing these difficulties, thinking it's somebody else's fault. And we have to be careful. It may not be anybody's fault at all. It may be just something we're going through. As we see in this life, which brings us to the next point, faith requires endurance. Does everybody agree with that? Faith requires endurance. And sometimes that endurance is for a long time. God had promised deliverance, and but when he told Joseph, he goes, they're going to be delivered. There wasn't going to be any time soon. 400 years actually becomes 430 years later when we see this happen. So God, would deliver them, but he never said it would happen immediately. And we must learn the same thing. We have to not wait on ourselves saying, okay, I'll wait till I can figure this out. No, we need to wait on God. We need to wait on God and hope that he can help us with this circumstances, knowing he will. Even when they seem bleak and they seem like no way out of it all, God will figure it out. Which brings us to our final one. Seeking God should be our first response. Should be our first response. Instead of turning to Pharaoh for help, the Israels, they went to Pharaoh immediately to ask for help. Who should have they went to? They should have went to God. We don't hear them praying here to God. We don't hear them going to God praying, get us through this. What's going on? What's happening here, God? Instead, they said that the one that was actually sent by God, God's going to judge you for this. Now, it's actually going to be the other way around. See, Moses did what most people would do. Of course, he became angry. He became upset with what God had done in this situation. He was expecting something different. He was expecting, I think, for what God said about Pharaoh's son, for all that to happen very quickly, in a moment, and with all this taking place here. So the Bible says this in Exodus 5, 22 and 23, the last few verses here. Someone go and read this for us, please.
So Moses returned to the Lord and said, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all.
Thank you. So, it sounds like, and it's just what I said a moment ago, it sounds like Moses expected this to happen very what? Very quickly. It sounds like he may have expected just one or two, appearances with Pharaoh, and that would take care of it. It would be done there, but it's not going to happen. That's why the story is so important, brethren, not only for what Israel went through, but for you and I to see how life works and to see how things go. Dave, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's the adage, we pray for something we expect it to happen immediately. And it doesn't happen that way. It could take years before something takes place that we've been praying about.
That's exactly right.
And sometimes we don't know that it has happened because that's not what we expected.
That's another good point, yeah. Sometimes we don't even know that God did what he said, what we wanted, what we asked for, but not what we were expecting for it to happen. As I said, when we ask God for something, do we have something in our mind for the way to be? Yeah, of course we do. That would be crazy if we didn't. We do. But now God's mind is greater than ours, and God knows what's best for us, which is hard to understand. So I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't think it should be like this. Thing should be like this. But God, when he's in the picture and he's the main part of that picture, he will take care of us. It may not be the way we want, but it'll happen. So here's Moses, he sees the rejection, the inadequacy, that he had. It must have all come back flooding to him. Look, I told God I couldn't do this. It's all me now. I can't do this. So Moses says, well, I'm going to run away again. It's not what he does. Moses must have a strong urge again, definitely to run and hide, to escape back to the quiet life of a shepherd, but he didn't. He didn't. He came to God. He ran, but he ran to God. It's kind of when you think of Jonah. We see Jonah with the fish. All the different runnings that we see there within it. This time he ran straight to the source of strength, and Moses poured out his heart, poured out all his anxiety, and the only one who could answer the question. And he knew it. He knew there was nothing Pharaoh was going to do at this point. He knew there was nothing he asked the Israelites about. It was only God that was going to take care of this. So, brethren, when our bad day takes a turn for the worse, the best thing we can do is turn to God. And as Moses turned to God with his questions, he did. He said, where had he gone wrong? Moses wanted to know, where have I gone wrong? What did I do? And that he had obeyed God, and he had used the exact words God had told him to say. And I love that Moses isn't blaming God. Moses thinking, where did I fall? Where did I mess up? And that's important because that shows the humility that is found in Moses now. Remember, he wasn't that humble before. And we see the humility now that's in him. So the very people he had wanted to help are now cursing him, angry at him, basically wanted him dead, as we see this happening. It sounds a lot like who? What do you think sounds a lot like dealt with this too? Same exact way. Jesus. Jesus himself, the exact same, all these things happening. The people want him dead now because he wasn't saying what he wanted them to say. He wasn't hearing the things. So today our lesson for us to think about this, once again, even leaders struggle with doubt. Here's Moses, their leader, and they don't know it yet, but he is. And it's going to happen time to time, even with us today. It's okay to bring our struggles to God as long as we continue to trust him and know that God is where our strength is to be found and our faith to be in. But also we see this, that God's faithfulness is not dependent on immediate results. Remember that. We look at God's faith. God said, I will be faithful to you, didn't he? God made it very clear. When we ask God to forgive us for anything or whatever it may be, and say, God, get me through this, it says God's faithful to us. But it doesn't mean that it's immediate. And so Moses did not see deliverance. God was still in control, and his promise would come to pass, and in his perfect timing that we would find out. And then finally, prayer is the key in moments of doubt. Prayer is the key, brethren. Moses brought his concerns to God, not to Pharaoh or the people. And in trials, our first instinct should be always to seek God's guidance and strength. I always wondered in this moment if somebody in leadership in the Israelites, one of the elders there outside of Moses, if they would have started praying to God, that God may have talked to them. God may have said something to them, because that's the way God did things back then. But more likely that didn't happen. That's not what we see. So perhaps when we look at this, the mistake of the officers, the children of Israel as a whole, and Moses, was that they presumed how God worked. They had an idea. This is how God does things. Brethren, we might do the same thing sometimes. This is how God is going to take care of it, and we don't see it that way. And God's like, I did take care of it, just not in the way you wanted. And then he did not work the way anticipated, as we find here. And as I said earlier, Moses should not have been surprised. Moses should not have been surprised by Pharaoh's reaction, or in fact, even the purpose of the Hebrews, because God had warned him what would happen. This was amazing about God with Moses. God didn't send Moses in there blind. He didn't send them in there blind with not knowing. God actually told Moses ahead of time, this is how it's going to go. And Moses, once again, he didn't see God working in the same way that God was going to work. So as we think about this before we close, trusting God despite the opposition, brethren, Exodus 5 is a powerful, powerful reminder, as we find here, that the obedience to God does not always guarantee an easy path. There's a path there, but it's going to be difficult at times. Instead, it often leads to trials and tests and to refine our faith. However, opposition does not mean that God is absent. His plans are greater than what we can see, and his faithfulness endures beyond our struggles, anything we're dealing with. Dad, go ahead.
When you made a comment a minute ago, it made me think of Isaiah 55, 8, 9. It says something like this: neither are your ways my ways, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts.
Yep, that's exactly right. I think about those things, like with, we were talking from time to time how Paul said, follow me. But he didn't say just follow me, he said follow me as I follow Christ. Was Paul's life perfect? Was Paul's life easy? Not at all. But he said he was following Jesus that whole time. But it didn't mean things were going to be perfect for him, and they weren't. So what do we learn? Remain steadfast in obedience, brethren, even in the challenging times of our life. Trust in God's timing, even when deliverance seems delayed to us, and encourage one another rather than placing blame or difficult times of our life. We encourage each other in all that we are. And this is what we have. With Moses and God meeting, it doesn't ever say that Aaron met with God. Moses did, and then Moses would remember to Aaron what God said. I wonder how often Aaron was there maybe going, come on, Moses, we can do this. We can do this. And, you told me what God said. And Moses, it kept his faith. And I truly believe in these moments, we always say God gave Moses Aaron just for his speech. I believe God gave Moses Aaron a lot more than just for that. Imagine if Moses had nobody to go back to talk to after each time one of these things happened. Or he had nobody to deal with, no one to help him through it. Aaron was there. God was there, of course, but it shows the importance of each other and what we can do for each other as we're unified, and that's what we see with that. All right, that's all we got. Any questions or comments before we close? Brother Clifford, go ahead.
Now, sometimes we have to be careful what we ask for, we might get it.
Yeah, I agree.
Later on, you remember the Israelites, they wanted kings.
Yep.
And some of those kings that they got wasn't definitely what they wanted.
That's exactly right. They wanted to be like everybody else, and they ended up being like everybody else, all right, having a king that was bad. I always say about James 1, James 1's talking about praying for patience, it said, don't ever do that. If you've ever done it, you pray for that. Be really careful, because things may happen to cause your patience to get better. And we see it, that's what Brother Clifford said, as we see that, be careful what you pray for. But God's not going to hurt us in any way. Don't think that. But God knows what we need, and we so think we have a God as that. All right, we're going to close there. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.